what I've been calling causal emotions enter us. Now, something like a causal emotion might be something like, no one loves me, a feeling that no one loves you. No one cares for me, I'm uncared for, I'm unloved, I'm unwanted, I'm not approved of, I'm not accepted. These are all fairly deep causal emotions within us. But for the majority of us, what we finish up, and you could say basically, just as an aside, you could say these type of emotions are emotions of how I feel about me. So in other words, most of the really darkest, deepest emotions within us that we're going to need to process at some point are related to how I actually feel about myself. And how I feel about myself, I finish up usually projecting onto my environment in some way if I don't resolve these negative feelings that I have about myself inside of myself. So causal emotions, in the end, a lot of times get to how I feel about me, how I deal with the issues that I have within myself, about myself. Of course, we also have a whole group of emotions related to that, about how we feel about others and how we treat others. But much of how we feel about others and how we treat others comes firstly from how we finish up treating ourselves before we even meet them. And so if I have a feeling inside of myself, for example, that I am unworthy to have money being spent on myself. So let's say I have that emotion. In other words, as a part of my law of attraction with that emotion, there'll be a group of a lack of abundance type things happening in my life. So I'm not going to have much personal abundance, I won't have much funds. And so as a part of that emotion, because I feel that I can't spend money on myself, I can't look after myself, I feel unworthy in fact to be looked after, I'm attracting a lack of abundance in my life. So that's how I feel about myself. But how does that get projected on the environment is, I finish up saying, when I notice somebody spending a lot of money, I zero in on them. Who's that? There's one there, she spends a lot of money, I know. There's another one, I think he spends a lot of money. You know, so we go in like that, and we zero in on those people and we judge them. Because we're already in this space ourselves of, I'm not allowed to spend money on myself, so why should anybody be allowed to spend money on themselves? Can you see the relationship? So a lot of times we finish up projecting how I feel about myself onto my environment. So they are causal emotions. But the problem with these causal emotions is they are so dark, they are so deep within us, they feel so hard to feel that I don't want to feel them. And so what I do, even as a child, and of course our parents of course don't want us to feel them either, so as a child we start creating a heap of blockages to feeling these emotions. So mum yells at me for taking 5 cents out of her purse when I was 3 years old, right? And she's really upset about that, not because it's 5 cents, but because I stole from her, right? And so she tells me all these bad things about myself. You know, you're just a bad boy, you know, and so right at that moment, I'm getting from her a heap of emotions that I'm terrible, I'm bad, I'm shameful, and all those kind of things. Those things are entering me. Now, under normal circumstances, a child getting this barrage of emotion from its parent would immediately cry because they're just openly vulnerable to their emotion. So under normal circumstances, they'd immediately go into tears and crying about how bad they feel. But mum then on top of that says, you cry about this and I'll give you something to cry about, right? So now we've got, right at that 3-year-old experience, a block created, right? A block to actually feeling the underlying causal emotion. The child is no longer able to feel what it really feels about itself in that particular moment, because the parent is now threatening it with further violence, which then shuts down the child even further. And so therefore we now have a layer, if you like, of blockages that are on this causal emotion. And these layer of blockages are mostly fear related. They are fears. For example, in the example that I gave, what's the child afraid of? It's afraid of the pain of crying. Like, it's not crying that's painful, it's the threat of the violence if they cry. And the threat of the violence if they cry is worse to them than the actual crying. And so what do? They shut down because of the potential pain involved. So we become so afraid, and this is where a lot of our fears come. So before then, the child knows that it can cope with its own emotion automatically. Do you ever see a baby at this age, like less than 6 months old or whatever, going to you and saying, "Oh, I don't know if I can feel that because I don't know if I'll cope with it"? Like, of course not, right? The child doesn't even think of that because it hasn't developed its brain yet anyway. But it just goes ahead and feels what it feels, doesn't it? Right in that moment, whatever that is, and it doesn't analyse it in any way. And so the child is actually totally capable of experiencing all of its own emotion. Totally capable. Every single one of its own emotions it's able to feel. And it does feel naturally, without our help. We don't need to take it along to a course to help it to feel its emotion, do we? Can you imagine the ludicrous feeling? Oh, my 3-month-old child can't cry. I need to take it along to a therapist to help it cry. And you see, this is what happens, is that the child knows how to do these things automatically. That's how God created us. That's the beauty of how God created us, is that how we were naturally created automatically happens from the moment that we arrive. However, because of these parental blockages and everything that gets piled on the child, by the time the child's 2 or 3 years of age, the child now is shut down in a lot of different areas. And these shutdowns weren't originally of their own making. Can you see that? They were really they were created by the environment. And the child absorbed the needs of the environment and conformed itself to that environment. Does that make sense? So the child felt the fears of its environment and then automatically started adjusting its behaviour to suit the environment. Now, the fears of the environment then became its own fears as the result. So now the child itself is in this place where the child is shut down quite a lot emotionally already. Now, the problem is, though, this child continues to grow and continues to change, continues to have life experiences, and as that growth continues, the child is experiencing more and more of a shut-down emotional environment, shut down people, shut down belief systems, not allowed to express myself without getting some kind of form of punishment or lack of love. There's no unconditional love in my environment. And so as the child grows up, it starts learning that there are things that it can do to get certain things fulfilled. So the causal emotion might be, I don't feel like somebody loves me. That's the causal emotion. This really dark, hopeless feeling that for some reason nobody loves me. Right? It's a very dark emotion. And instead of feeling that emotion, because it's not allowed to as a child feel it, because of the blockages that the parents and the environment have placed upon it, it then it still wants the feeling. It still wants the feeling of being loved. So how does it go about getting it? It learns what we have all learnt, and that is to barter one thing for another thing. So in other words, I learn to earn the love that I want, rather than it just be given to me as a gift, because I'm not getting the love as a gift anywhere on the planet, hardly. And so what I need to do now is start earning it. So I learn that there's a cost associated that I pay, and then the other person will give me the thing that I want. Right? It sounds like our financial system, does it not? Which, can you see, is basically based around the same emotional premise. I have to pay, the whole user pays capital system is all based around, there's no such thing as gifts. Everyone has to earn their way into whatever it is. So, like, God's given us a planet where we've got huge amounts of available water for us to drink. But what have we learnt to do with this? What man does is he grabs that and turns this into a user pay system. There's so much lack of love on this planet that you've even got to pay for your drinking water. Something that within a few days, if you don't have it, you'll die. That's how much lack of love there is here. If there was more love, all of us would be able to have water for free, because that's what God gave, all the water for free. So there's no need for us to have to pay for it, but we've set up this system because we've got this belief right from our environment that we have to pay for anything that we want. And we've learnt that we have to pay for love. That's what we've learned. And in the process of learning to have to pay for love, we have become addictive people. We've set up what is called codependence. Right? If I want to be loved, I've got to earn it from you. And then, if you think about it, that means that I've got to do what you want. And that will be earning it from you. And when I earn that from you, then you'll give me the love that I need for myself, that I feel that makes me feel good. And if I can't earn it from you, then I'll go to another person and try to earn it from them. or from them. And so we finish up having a lot of these, and in fact, almost every relationship at some point in our lives before we recognise these truths is actually codependent and addictive. Now, at the soul level, it's even worse than that. Because at the soul level, this emotion of how I feel about myself is being emanated out into the universe at every single moment that I don't actually want to feel it. So I don't want to feel my causal emotion, which is how unloved I was from my mother, let's say. So I have a causal emotion inside of me that I feel terribly unloved by my mother. This emotion I don't want to feel, and my mum didn't even want me to feel it, so she shut it down in me as well. And by the time I'm an adult now, I'm now not wanting to feel this terrible, unloved feeling that I have. But it's coming out of me. It's like coming out the pheromones of your skin, basically, but it's actually from your soul. It's like this pervasive, invisible, but something you can feel coming from a person, but it's invisible, coming out of them, enveloping every single person in their environment. So if I'm in this place myself, where I'm feeling unloved by my mother, coming out of me to every single person in this audience is, I am unloved by my mother. I feel unloved by my mother. But I'm not feeling it. I don't want to feel it. That's why it's coming out of me. Because I don't want to personally feel it and just cry and release it inside of myself. So it comes out of me. And out of me comes with it this demand that every woman in my environment loves me. Because that's the feeling I have. I'm not loved by the woman, and out of me comes this feeling that I've got to be loved by the woman before I'll even interaction with them. So lo and behold, 3 or 4 different types of women come up to me and I start talking to them, and I think these are just normal interactions, like normal day-to-day interactions, but actually they're not. They're actually interactions based on the soul demand inside of myself that a woman loves me. And these women have a feeling that they've got to love the male to get something from the male. So they have a reciprocal addiction, a codependent addiction. And these women just hone in on me because I've got the opposite addiction that's acceptable to them. And before we know it, we're entering relationships without even knowing why we're entering them. And we feel very attracted to these people. And most of the time we feel very attracted because we're actually in this codependent relationship with them, where what's coming out of me gets satisfied by them, and what's coming out of them gets satisfied by me. And so now we're in a very satisfactory relationship. I really like that person because of this codependent addiction. But this person over here, who doesn't supply the codependent addiction that I'm looking for, I think she's a bitch. Right? This woman's fine. This woman's a bitch. I just can't get along with her because my codependent addiction and hers are incompatible with each other. Now, you see, when you get to a place where you love everyone, do you think you'll be thinking some people are bitch and some people aren't? Well, obviously not. You'll love everyone and you'll feel a strong, passionate feeling for that, in that loving space. So you won't feel like this woman's a bitch. Even if she has emotional injuries and everything, and even if she's yelling at you, you won't feel like, oh, she's a bitch. You will actually feel a feeling of love for her. But you see, that's not what's happening, because most of the time what's happening is I'm very focused on how I feel about myself, and so therefore what I'm doing is I'm focusing in on myself, feeling like anybody who satisfies an emotion inside of me is a person that I'll get along with. Everybody who doesn't satisfy an emotion inside of me in some way, I can't get along with. And it sets up this codependent, addictive world that we live in. So much so that, and to be frank with you, it does create the emotion that you've got to pay for your water, believe it or not. Right down to that level. It creates all of this physical environment that we live in, thinking that we've got to live in it, but in reality we don't. We could easily give it all up, but only by dealing with our codependent addictions. So that's why it's quite important to understand. So here I am, I'm in this space. So if you could think of it, here's me, here's my physical body, but reality, that's not me, is it? And there's my spirit body, but that's not me either. The real thing that this is coming from is my half of the soul. This is the real me, my half of the soul. And out of the real me comes these emotions that I am now, as an adult, unwilling to feel. So I'm unwilling to feel that women don't love me, that my mother didn't love me. And so I totally detune from that. I don't want to feel mum did not love me. Because if you feel mum doesn't love you, gee, that's a pretty confronting emotion when you think about it. If your mum can't love you, who can? All right? Now the truth is that, you know, that if your mum can't love you, it doesn't mean other people can't. But there's a feeling in us that if our own mother who brought us into the world can't love us, then nobody can. So we don't even want to know that mum doesn't love us. We don't even want to feel that at all. But because it's inside of us, it's an emotion coming out of us constantly in every interaction with every woman on the planet. And by the way, not just on the planet. It's an emotional interaction with every spirit who's a woman who has yet to deal with her codependent addictions as well. So there's just so many people that are going to be attracted to me to help me feel that they are going to be the woman who loves me. Right? And while they're going to be the woman who loves me, so here's the woman on the other end with her, of course, her spirit body and her physical body, which really are just vehicles by which her soul is going to express itself. While I'm projecting that out, this woman, any woman who's going to be attracted to me, is going to be attracted to making the unloved man feel loved. She's going to just feel like, oh, just so attracted to this man. He's so beautiful. He's so, like, she'll just feel that inside of herself. And it won't be for any other reason than having a codependent addiction within herself being met at the same time. So the problem we have on earth is that almost all of our lives are spent meeting the emotional demands of the emotions we personally ourselves are unwilling to feel. So I'm unwilling to feel that my mum doesn't love me, and out of me comes a demand to any woman, you've got to love me, and any woman who feels like she's got to love the man in order to get one of her codependent addictions met will be invited into that interaction. Now, that's what I would call an addiction. So you know what people call an addiction? They say, oh, well, you know, people are addicted to drugs, or people are addicted to alcohol, or people are addicted to TV watching, or people are addicted to movies, or people are addicted to sports, or high adrenaline, you know, active sports, for example. People are addicted to all these different things. Every single one of those physical addictions comes from an emotional place. And it starts with an emotional addiction not being met. So what will happen with physical addictions is we create this life where we're now blocked down to our causal emotions. We don't want to feel our causal emotions. And so what we now want is we want our environment to satisfy the unfelt demands, the unfelt causal emotional demands. So my causal emotional demand is, please love me. If you're a woman, please love me. That's my emotion. Because I have this feeling that I'm not loved by women inside of me. then the plea going out to the universe is, please love me. Any woman out there, please love me, is really what's coming from my soul. Does that make sense? And as that's coming out of my soul, any woman who goes, yeah, I love you, yeah, she'll be attracted to that because of something inside of her soul, right? And so I'm now expecting, I have an expectation, this is an expectation that is placed upon my environment to meet my unhealed emotional need. Does that follow with everyone? I'm projecting out to my environment that you've got to meet my unhealed emotional need. If I heal this emotional need, will I have it being projected out to the environment anymore? No, I won't. Right? But I don't want to heal it because I don't want to feel it because it feels too painful. That's what I think. So it feels too painful. And my parents, through this blocking and suppressing process, told me it's too painful. They told me that I'd never be able to cope with it. They taught me that I won't be able to cope with it. And so they suppressed it as well. They couldn't cope with their own. So of course they believe that you're not going to be able to cope with yours. So they suppress all that, keep that all under control. And so what's coming out of me then is, I want my environment to meet the unhealed emotion. And that's the addiction. I want the environment to meet my unhealed emotion. Now, how do I know I have an addiction? Well, whenever my unhealed emotion doesn't get met, when I have an addiction, I will always get angry or hurt. Right? So that's a measure of how we have an addiction. So, every time you've got angry, it's because one of your addictions has not been met. Does that make sense to everyone? Every time you felt hurt inside of you, it is because one of your addictions has not been met. And if you can trace the addiction down, you will find under it a causal emotion, which you are wanting to avoid in that moment. You'll always find that. If we can have a mic.